soon come, can't run neither high. Crying for freedom, just take it or die. Babylon fall with all their lies. Freedom soon come, you really see nobody being born with you and me. Let my people go. Let my people go. Let my people go. Here we go. Let them go. What? All the souls are back home. America was sea soil, son. That's why we're hysterical. Spent 400 years in the belly of a cannibal, swallowing souls, throwing dry bones to the animals under the table. System bloodthirsty dogs ran iron ankles, uninspiring outlaws, creating corruptions with their whispering walls. We go circle sending back trumpets and watch it fall while y'all committing crimes to extermination, with genocide, dirty water regulation, prison poverty, and serving protect sanctions. We better get out of the way. The father's done with it. We better go. Don't you know what promise? When you touch them, you touch me. Say, I will call and I will call you by name. Let my people go. Swing, 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 swing. Lost each other, get caught, taking home, cause I've been in exile from Apple to Rome, and it's been so long since I see my land, so come save your sheep with your mighty hand as the warriors cloaked in the dark of night. As the time has come to see the sun's light, while some fight for wealth, we fight for liberty. So to overcome the world is gonna take you and me to bring forth the kingdom, which is our ultimate goal. That's why we're telling Pharaoh to let our people go. Let our people go. Let our people go. Swing go. Go. Let our people go. 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 Let our people go. Swing low, chariot, take me home. Swing low, chariot, take me home.
Hallelujah. We will open with a Hatzi Kaddish. In a spirit of prayer, we say, Yit Gadal Vayit Kadesh Shemei Rabbah. Be'elmadi Barakerote Vayimelich Malkute. V'chayechunu v'yamichunu v'chayedu kol Beit Yisrael Bagala uvizman kari v'imeru. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mavorach Leolam Ul Me'amaya. Yit Barak Vayishtabach V'yit Pa'ar V'yit Roman V'yit Naseh. V'yit Adar V'yit Alei V'yit Alal Shemei Dekudasha Berechu. Ela min kol barakata vashirata tush bechata vanechmata damiran ba'alma v'miru. Amen. Magnified and sanctified may his great name be in the world he created by his will. May he establish his kingdom in your lifetime and in your days and in the lifetime of all the house of Israel, swiftly and soon. And let us say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever in all time. Blessed and praised, esteemed and exalted, raised and honored, uplifted and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, beyond any blessing, song, praise, and consolation uttered in the world. And let us say, Amen. Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Hebrew Vision Live. I am your host this evening, Mikhail Corbin-Yahu, a.k.a. the End Time Scribe. We have had some very dynamic shows in the past few weeks, and we are planning to have some more dynamic shows as our calendar has been being just booked with some very powerful people, as we're now about to enter into a segment that we're going to call The Voice of the People. So we're going to be definitely getting into some perspective, some interviews with the people, our people in the African diaspora. And of course, you just heard the song, Let My People Go, which is by Nakia Bat Yahuda, featuring Nehemiah Yasharun, Yaleach Bat Yahuda, Mikhail Corbin-Yahu. This song was actually just awarded, all praises to the Most High, the Hebrew Award Music Single of the Year. So, big up to Nakia, Nehemiah, Yaleach, for the work that we put in together for this track to make that, receive that recognition, that honor of being the Hebrew Awards Music Single of the Year. So all praises to the Most High for that. And so this evening we're going to deal with some matters that are very important geopolitically. We're going to take a geopolitical thrust this evening, and we're going to really deal with some matters that we need to really understand clear and undisputed. And that is going to be the role of the continent of Africa as relates to our liberation as a people. And so the name of this particular podcast for this evening is going to be entitled Focus on Africa, from Black Power to Pan-Africanism. And this is something that, especially in this era that we have just entered with the Trump administration, and we're going to do some focus geopolitically on that as well, but with the Trump administration coming into the forefront of the imperial regime of the United States, which is just one of the three heads in the empire of the city, dealing with this Western hegemon and this imperial pursuit of the fourth beast, prophetically speaking, headed by none other than the Vatican. We need to really understand the role of solidarity. We need to understand the role of our unity and the role of the primacy of the continent of Africa as relates to our liberation, to our self-determination, and to our survival and existence as a people. And so I want to open up with an article from the All African People's Revolutionary Party to contextualize this. And the name of the article, where we get the subtitle of our podcast for this evening, From Black Power to Pan-Africanism, Remembering Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, who is a preeminent Pan-Africanist thinker in our great legacy and our great heritage of resistance and struggle against the Western imperial hegemon. So this was submitted by AAPRP. This was back in November of 2016 that this article was written, in which the writer says, if you accept Black power, you must accept Pan-Africanism, because it is the logical and consistent development. The highest political expression of Black power is Pan-Africanism. And this is a quote from Kwame Ture. And of course, we know Kwame Ture going back to the days of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which he was the chairperson, and then becoming a Black Panther, and then just continuing his evolution as a revolutionary of becoming a Pan-Africanist and the founder, co-founder of the AAPRP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, with Kwame Nkrumah. And of course, his name change comes from taking the name of Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana after its liberation, and also from Sekou Touré, who was the president of, I believe it was Guinea-Bissau. Don't quote me on that, but Sekou Touré was also a 1960s leader out of Africa who also received the liberation of his people, took part in the liberation of his people from imperial forces, imperial European forces. Kwame Nkrumah is quoted as saying, Black power is part of the world rebellion between the oppressed and the oppressor, the exploited against the exploited against the exploiter. It's linked to the Pan-African struggle for unity on the African continent and with all those striving for socialist society. That's again Kwame Nkrumah. So Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, will forever be associated with Black power. He didn't invent the slogan, which he clearly said. The concept of Black power preceded the 1960s when it became the rallying cry that transformed a movement. Black Power, the slogan reemerged in 1966 from a vibrant movement of youth led by Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, reinvigorating and transforming the civil rights movement into a struggle for power against imperialism. And this is what we're going to really take a little focus on tonight, is imperialism, because this is what we need to understand in this greater dynamic. When you deal with imperialism, you're dealing with a construct that is fusing the forces of capitalism, the forces of racism, the forces of fascism, the forces of militarism, the forces of just oppression of peoples of color. And then the spirit behind it, which we also have to be cognizant of, which again comes from the fourth beast of the Roman Empire, which has become known as the Vatican as well. And its vampire squid now identity of morphing and transmogrifying into these corporate entities as well, and these oligarchs who are control over these nations. This is what we're having to recognize and deal with. This is a struggle for power against imperialism, all right? And we're transforming this struggle for civil rights, as what Malcolm pushed for, into human rights. But eventually, we have to struggle for righteousness. This is what the ultimate struggle is for, righteousness, according to the law of the Most High. So spontaneous as it seemed, this was a process largely influenced by the brutal repression of the capitalist system against African and other oppressed peoples locally in the United States, in places like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and globally, those fighting against colonialism and neo-colonialism in Angola, Congo, Guinea-Bissau, Vietnam, and settler colonialism in South Africa, Palestine, America, and Ireland. So what we have to see is that what is being experienced in Mississippi is the same thing that's being experienced in Mozambique. What is being experienced in Georgia is the same thing that's being experienced in Ghana. There are connections that tie the experiences of African peoples in the diaspora together in our struggle for liberation. So we cannot ignore the struggles of our brothers on the continent of Africa, nor can we ignore the struggles of our brothers and the plight of our people here in North America, and more specifically in the United States. But this also includes Brazil. This also includes New Guinea. This also includes the people and our peoples wherever they may be found. And this is why Pan-Africanism is so imperative to our struggle. Continuing with the article. Malcolm X certainly contributed to the look toward African nationalism in his critique of the armed struggle in Kenya and the success of the Cuban Revolution. African leaders of the day included Martin Luther King could not ignore the national liberation struggles in Africa. Martin Luther King was in Accra, Ghana in 1957, as Nkrumah declared the independence of Ghana was meaningless without the independence of all of Africa. And then even to further that, what we have to understand is that the independence of Africa is meaningless if African people are still oppressed. And this is what we have to clearly and definitively and critically understand, so that we can become who the Creator has destined us to become. King made some of his strongest speeches against the settler occupation in apartheid South Africa. Kwame Ture's life exemplified the notion of black power in his generation. He learned from the study and the participation in our people's struggle for black power, and he became one of its clearest articulators. He came to understand power was impossible without revolutionary ideology and organization. Ideology and organization. Imperative if we are to have a united front. Imperative if we are to have solidarity. Imperative if we are to have unity. Imperative if we are to have collective work and responsibility. Imperative if we're going to have cooperative economics. Imperative if we're going to have self-determination. I could go on and on and on and listing why ideology must be the baseline of our collective struggle. This will even inform our organization. Now, one thing that Hebrew Vision articulates, however, is that we are a Torah-founded freedom federation. This is what we emphasize as our ideologies, identifying ourselves in the Pan-African spectrum as Hebrew Israelites. Yes, we do understand we are African people. We are intimately connected to the African struggle for liberation. Matter of fact, we understand that we are the crown diamond of the African struggle. Okay? Because the world will ultimately reflect the light that we will be emitting once we return to the law, statutes, commands, and Torah of the Most High in the Messiah and become his body, in effect, becoming the Messiah and spearheading as the lightning rod the liberation of our peoples through a spiritual, transcending awakening. This is the only thing that is truly going to cause us to overcome. We cannot fight our enemies on their battlefield. We have to bring them to our battlefield, which is in the spirit. We have to use quantum physics. This is what King talked about in one of his speeches. We knew water, you know what I'm saying? We knew fire. We knew these things, but not in the form which they knew. Because there's some sort of quantum metaphysical reality that we have dormant within us that once awakened, it's a wrap. But let me get back to this article. Again, the focus of what I was just talking about was the significance and the imperative nature of ideology and organization as relates to our revolutionary struggle. And I will even say our evolutionary struggle. So Kwame Ture, like SNCC and all the organizations he was a member of, didn't just talk about Black Power. They came to live it, from the Armed Self-Defense in Lowndes County, Alabama, where the concept of the Black Panthers for self-defense originated, to Guinea-Conakry, working with the African Liberation Forces and the Democratic Party of Guinea, African Party for the Liberation of Guinea-Bissau, and Cape Verde, which is with the esteemed and late Amilcar Cabral, etc., revolutionaries like Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, and of course, Amilcar Cabral. It's here in Guinea-Conakry where he became an organizer for the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, which is belovedly known as the AAPRP. From SNCC to the Black Panthers to the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, Kwame Ture became clearer and clearer on the question of Black power. He came to understand that Black power's ultimate expression could only be achieved through Pan-Africanism, the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. So from there, we're going to base our podcast today in the understanding and in the dynamic and in the paradigm of Pan-Africanism. Okay, so we're going to progress in that particular light and in that thrust, in that vein, because in that vein is where we will actually be able to contextualize our struggle as a people and move in the direction of our liberation and our freedom. So our next article that I want to bring to our focus comes to us from the African Executive. It was printed just yesterday, and it is by the author Courtney Sage, by the author Sage, and the name of the article is entitled Leadership in the Digital Age. Okay, one thing that we have to really make clear is we need effective leadership. Okay, and I don't mean leaders, I mean leadership. We have to be a group-centered leadership. Okay, we have to have leadership that is group-centered. We cannot have leader-centered groups. When we have leader-centered groups, this is where demagogues and icons and even basically dictatorial organizations come into existence. We need group-centered leadership. Very essential to our struggle. So again, leadership in the digital age, it isn't about control, but comfort with uncertainty. The C-suite executives and HR leaders that will succeed in the era of the digital age and global economic and political uncertainty will be those that are the most curious and adaptable rather than those that are rigid and hierarchical. We have to be curious and adaptable in these days and times, all right? That is one of the key insights to emerge in the first episode of Invisible Administration, Conversations about the Future Work, which is a series of podcasts from Sage and Inquisition. A good leader in the past was regarded as a person who was certain about what needed to be done. But with technology, economic and political change unfolding at such a rapid pace, today's leaders operate in a world that is less certain, says an expert on the future world of work and founder of Tomorrow Today. Okay, so this is paradigms that we're going to have to look at on the geopolitical landscape. This is economically, this is politically, this is socially, this is culturally, this is even in the spiritual realm. Okay, leaders have to be curious and adaptable. Strategies developed today may need to change tomorrow in response to new competition, new technology, or different economic circumstances. Vice President of People HR at Sage International, which is in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Australia, says that, now here's the key, as globalization, okay, this is something that we have to recognize. Globalization, these are terms for New World Order. These are terms for the New Order of the Ages, okay? But this is all focused on a humanist, secularist push that the multinational corporations are trying to make happen, okay? And they're ruling out the reality of spirit. They're ruling out the reality of humanity, all right? When I say they're humanists, this is completely that which they worship. And they will actually get into what they call a transhumanist model. But I will digress from that and deal with this article. But they say that as globalization and new technology challenge managers' traditional mindsets, they also need to relook at the profile of the people they employ, or that we serve, or that are actually a part of the organizations, okay? They need to build teams that are comfortable with change and ambiguity, and that in turn demands that they think about training, recruitment, and management in new ways. Now, I'm looking at this in a very fluid manner. We can look at this statically and say, okay, no, they're just talking about labor. But labor is a very essential aspect to our social organism, okay? And so these principles are transferable. So when we look at this, we're looking at this in principle, because this is going to be essential as relates to our dealing with imperialism. We have to be able to deal with change and ambiguity. We have to be able to adapt to our circumstances and our environment, okay? So experimentation key to responsiveness. Many leaders know that they are facing uncertainty, but aren't quite sure how to start adapting to it. Codrington says that the easiest, simplest way to start this journey is to encourage teams to experiment, okay? Experiments can be small or large, but the key is to start questioning long-held assumptions about the way we work and why we do things in a specific way. For example, one could test out allowing people to work from home for 2 days a week and monitor productivity levels, or do away with email updates and meetings for a week and see what happens. Over time, this approach will help companies become more responsive to changes in the environment. So this also relates to our practice with one another. Okay, we have to find ways to become more organic in this very digital age. Okay, we understand we are an organism, and the intelligence that the Creator has given us does far outweigh even the intelligence of the artificial stuff that we're dealing with now. Now, I'm going to go ahead and table that article and get to another article, because I think that I just wanted to give us a framework of what our leadership needs to be like, what we need to look to in order to understand how to adapt to this very, very fluid and uncertain landscape that we're dealing with geopolitically. Okay, because when we're reading like some of the scriptures and we're talking about these signs that we're now encountering, these are the signs that are very reflective of the visitation of the Most High. We're dealing with the wavering of leaders. We're dealing with the unrest of peoples. We're dealing with the toppling of governments. We're dealing with earthquakes and various outbreaks of natural disasters. So how do we respond to this as leaders And how does our leadership respond to this? Okay, so these are the things that we need to be able to adapt to and understand how to adjust in this very age of flux. This next article comes to us from panbazooka.org. It is written by a Yash Tandon. It was written last year, as a matter of fact, but it's called Reflections on Post-U.S. Elections Geopolitics. And this is part 3 of a 6-part series. I found this here to really define what it is that this focus on Africa and from Black Power to Pan-Africanism is really about, because we're dealing with a lot of different factors that are really going to come down to some economic bearings, okay? Even when we deal with Scripture, we're going to see in like Revelation 13 how economics are at the forefront of this satanic and beastly kingdom, okay? No man may be able to buy or sell save he that has the mark. So this is dealing with economics. So we have to look at these things in the greater perspective, all right? But Yash Tandon says that Donald Trump is an economic nationalist. Very interesting analysis he makes there. An economic nationalist. And we'll get into the definition of that. In the wake of his electoral victory, the peoples of the global South need to intensify their struggles against economic orthodoxy. So we need to be adaptable. Again, this is why that previous article is so imperative, because if we're going to struggle against economic orthodoxy and this Bretton Woods one paradigm of the petrodollar, and we're seeing how it's shifting every day, okay, then we need to understand how we can deal with the economic constraints that have been placed on us, okay? So we need to then work on developing alternatives that take into account the fact that all countries, not just the United States, all countries without exception are economic nationalists, including those that swear by the ideology of free market globalization. Economic nationalism. Capitalism has been a progressive force in its times. And we know this has been a Western expression, okay? But has given rise to resistance at various levels. The first resistance came from its exploited classes, the industrial workers. And the reality of the matter is this, is that African peoples, there are other peoples who are also in similar straits that we are. And they are not even our national identity. They don't have our ethnic identity, but they have our class identity, okay? And class is a major denominator as relates to dealing with liberation, because we can develop solidarity with people such as the Bandung Conference in the 60s, where you had all the melanated peoples of the world come together to address how to deal with Western imperialism. Okay, so just keep that in your pocket. But this resistance first came from its exploited classes, the industrial workers. When capitalism was obliged by its own logic to colonize, it gave rise to national resistance. Hence, we had the American War of Independence in the 19th century, and wars and struggles for national independence in the global South in the 20th, and still continuing. This struggle has both a political and an economic dimension. You cannot ignore one without the other. Okay? This segment deals with the economic. In the previous segment, under the subheading The National Question, we dealt with its essentially political and ideological dimension. But economic nationalism is part of the liberation struggle against imperialism. And this is the frame which we have to have our mindset established in. We are struggling not against just racism, not just against capitalism, not just against fascism. We're struggling against imperialism, the fourth empire, the fourth beast, the fourth kingdom, okay? This is Rome revived, prophetically speaking. It is my contention, Yash Tandon says, it is his contention that students of economics need a higher degree of awareness of history and a deeper understanding of the geopolitics of economic nationalism in order to make sense of the economic and political realities on the ground. Given the overall title of this series, I would argue that Donald Trump is an economic nationalist. So economic nationalism is universal phenomenon. It's a universal phenomenon. The imperial deception. We'll start with the very continents that are today opposed ideologically to economic nationalism, namely the United States and the European Union. However, what they preach is not what they do or wish to do. They are as much economic nationalists as the very countries they criticize. The evidence of this proposition is overwhelming, from agriculture to the environment to banking. Let us take banking and finance. It is arguably the most international in character. In Europe, the banks are facing a serious crisis as a result of tough competition from American banks. European investment banks are losing out market share to Americans. Germany's biggest bank, Deutsche Bank, has acknowledged that it must retreat from global ambitions following a 6 billion Deutschmark quarterly loss, resulting in 9,000 job cuts, a quarter of its workforce. Top European bankers, which include the chairman of Barclays, John McFarlane, have warned of the American threat to their future. France Societe Generale Chief Executive Frédéric Oudéa and President of the European Banking Federation said that a handful of robust Americans are gaining market share abroad while strengthening their positions at home. He said that the top 5 U.S. banks had increased their share of the global capital market from 48 to 59% in the past 5 years, while the top 5 EU banks have slipped from 35 to 31%. So you're seeing this America First paradigm has been in place really for a while, and the role that America has played in the global economy has been central to its position as world superpower. Okay, now there are some challenges that are being made to that, though, and so we're going to see how this is all unfolding geopolitically, because you got to understand, again, the economic infrastructure of this empire is largely hinged upon the political infrastructure as well. So other examples of economic nationalism. In 2005, the U.S. company Chevron and the China National Offshore Oil Corp made competitive bids for Unocal, which is a Californian oil company. The ferocious reaction of Congress against the Chinese bid surprised nobody, except those deluded by the ideology of free flow of capital across borders. Congress feared that the Chinese takeover would put risks to American energy sovereignty and compromise its national security. In July of 2005, the French political elite mounted a massive campaign to prevent Danone, the country's leading food group, against takeover by an American predator, PepsiCo. How could they say the U.S. dare take over our national champion? Of course, it is a different story if a third world country dares to exercise economic nationalism. In April of 2012, Argentina's President Cristina Kirchner asked Congress, in the interest of securing hydrocarbon self-sufficiency, to nationalize oil and gas producer YPF, owned largely by the Spanish conglomerate Repsol YPF, a company that employs 24,000 workers globally and has revenue of the euro $44 billion, $44.67 billion, okay? This was as of 2014. She also took action against other hedge funds. The Western reaction was strong. How dare a communist third world banana republic take matters in its hands like this? Following smear campaigns, street wars between the embattled Kirchner and the deep state backed by the empire, Kirchner lost her presidency. In February of 2016, the new president, Mauricio Macri, offered to pay $6.5 billion to the group of 6 hedge fund holdouts. In addition to the 75% payment in principal and hefty interest accumulated over the years, 13 years of hefty legal bills would also be picked up by Argentina. Estimates on the returns that the super holdouts will make on their investment in Argentina bonds range from 3 to 5 times what they had paid for their bonds. Now, we're getting into resource nationalism. And this is where a lot of this comes down to, because when you're dealing with Africa and their interaction with these other imperialist nations, you're dealing with the struggle over resources. And this is crucial. Africa is not the poorest continent on earth. By far, it is the richest continent on earth. However, Africa is the most raped continent, resource and human wise. All right. And this is something, again, we have to understand, because as African people, we must understand the primacy of that landmass as relates to our international respect, to our international role in geopolitical affairs, and to our international liberation. It is unquestioned when you really understand the critical analysis of our position and our condition in history. The primacy of Africa is crucial as it relates to our liberation. So all the three cases described above relate to resource nationalism. Global resources are unequally distributed. Okay, this is why there's so many people suffering in the continent of Africa, because of the stranglehold that these imperialist nations and multinational corporations have on the continent. Okay, so the bulk of them are in the global south. Their ownership and control, however, remain largely in the hands of Western corporations, which are jealously protecting their historical rights over these resources, which they got through bloodshed, okay, which they got through displacement, which they got through the stoking of civil wars and tribal wars in the continent of Africa, which they got through the enslavement of peoples and the kidnapping of African people and the murder, outright genocide of people, of African ancestry and Indian ancestry and Asian ancestry. And we need to note that, okay? This is a very sensitive area of the struggle between the global north and the global south. Obviously, we cannot even begin to make a list of the many issues involved. However, I would like to mention two issues that are often either left out of mainstream research or dealt with rather cursorily. One is the issue of the rights of indigenous peoples the world over. These can no longer be ignored. They are the battle lines of the future. What we see in Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela are the beginnings of the Arab Spring in the area of natural resources, and will spread over the rest of the world, not least Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and most of Asia and Africa. The second is the issue of women's rights to national resources. At the international level, the national rights to the resources are a burning issue. But at the national and local levels, it is the right of women to these resources that is critical, especially land. In fact, land and women's rights are two sides of the same coin. Metaphorically, land is women, and women are land. They are the earth that bear the fruits, right? So he knows this from his 15 years experience working amongst the rural people in southern Africa. The ideological terrain. Here the battle lines go back to the free trade versus protection debate. It is largely an academic, ideological debate, for as we have seen above, economic nationalism, including protectionism, is a universal phenomenon. There is nothing called free trade. A bit of history will give a proper context to this debate. The American 1775 to 1783 war against England was about economic as well as, of course, political independence. Following independence, America went for a full-fledged program of economic nationalism. Within 50 years, the U.S. was well on its way to industrialization. Friedrich List, a German political economist then living in the United States, decided he could suggest to his compatriots that they too should follow the lead of the U.S. In 1841, he wrote the National System of Political Economy. It was the beginning of economic nationalism in Germany, followed by other countries in Europe, and then Japan. In 1884 and 1885, the European nations met in Berlin and carved up Africa. This is what they call the Berlin Conference, okay? This is essential history to know and understand as relates to the modern state of Africa, the contemporary state, post-colonial or neo-colonial Africa right now, because that was one of the beginnings of the imperial insurgents into the continent of Africa. Of course, it goes back prior to that, 1444, from the west, and it goes back even further from that, from the Arab invasion of Africa. The German Chancellor Bismarck presided over the division. The Europeans needed access to cheap raw materials, which they could no longer get from America or the older colonies. This was the material reality. the erstwhile economic nationalists turned imperialists. Here it is again. It is only one step from being a nationalist to being an imperialist. Germany needed colonies for the sake of national interest. None of the economic theories, classical, neoclassical, Listian, German, historical school, Austrian school, among others, came to save Africa from savage colonization. This is where we find ourselves stuck. No one will come to save us but ourselves. And that must be done in the Most High. And I'm saying that we can't even understand what I'm saying in this matter. We cannot expect divine intervention to happen unless we put steps forward. There must be some sort of demonstration of trust and acknowledgement in the process of redemption in order for our redemption from this savage colonization to take place. We must put the steps into motion. So nor for that matter did the Hamilton School of American Nationalists. At the time, the Americans were too preoccupied with their own imperialist project in South America, declaring these as their sphere of interest under the Monroe Doctrine. New theories and ideologies had to be invented to legitimize Africa's predation. They were preying on the African continent. Preying. Economic theories were now embellished by a missionary ideology, the white man's burden to civilize Africa. But you cannot go into a continent or to a country where people are already existing at peace with one another, decimate their civilization, and call it civilizing them. That is not civil. That is barbarity. Today, as we discussed above, it is the free trade globalization. This man's book, which is called Trade is War, gives a blow-by-blow account and analysis of this empire-driven, curious phenomenon of free trade that belies the reality on the ground. Now, the question to the matter is this, and this is how he concludes it. What is the way forward? How do we move forward? The first thing we must realize is that this is an upstream struggle. The empire is not about to disappear anytime soon. For sure, it is weakening, and for all intents and purposes, it has become a paper tiger. But it still has a lot of clout to do enormous damage to economic nationalists. To get some insight into this, look at what has been happening to Greece over the last 2 years. Okay? Now, we know they're going through some extreme austerity consequences over in Greece due to their position economically that's been taking place. They're struggling, all right? Continuing, the following are some of the highlights of the way forward. I have Africa in mind, but they have relevance for the whole of the global South. 1, we need to challenge economic orthodoxy and work on development alternatives that take into account the fact that all countries, without exception, are economic nationalists, including those that swear by the ideology of the free market globalization. 2, one of the most vital aspects on an alternative strategy is to protect local industries that add value to local resources and put in place strong barriers against imports that kill local industries. So we need to have more local resources, okay? Localize them. Let's find ways to stop dealing with these chains and these multinational corporations and start dealing with one another. Bartering, having your own gardens, right? Growing your own food, making your own clothes, doing little things like that that can start to secure our own communities and networks, and then link them in solidarity with one another. So I know this goes against the so-called laws of the World Trade Organization. So be it. Let the WTO and the empire impose sanctions on Africa. They cannot harm African economies more than they are already doing. Decoupling from free market globalization must be properly strategized and sequenced. The value addition must be done first at the local level, then at the national level, then regional, then continental. Divestiture. That is the most effective thing that we can do to cripple and destabilize this beast. Divest. That is it right there. But number 3, there should be no open door policy towards free trade and foreign direct investments in general. These might be allowed as and when required by national consensus by the government. So this means that we have to have a direct democracy. The people's voices have to be heeded. This is what he's talking about, a national consensus. We don't have that in most of these Western governments. It is ruled by the oligarchy, okay? So the local, not foreign private sector, the workers, the small farmers, and other organs of civil society, there must be a national consensus between all these groups and sectors. The FDIs, the foreign direct investments, must operate under certain nationally determined conditions. For example, limited access to domestic savings, and they must conform to certain performance requirements, for example, effective transfer of technology and managerial know-how. So this means that if we do have foreign investments into our economy, they must be controlled, monitored, and actually accepted on consensus by the people in order to benefit us. Okay? And 4, economic nationalism does not preclude regionalism, nations getting together to integrate regionally. In fact, for Africa to get rid of the yoke of European and American imperialism, it is imperative that they integrate at a continental level, though starting at first at regional levels, as prescribed by, for example, the Lagos Plan of Action that the African Union agreed to in April of 1980, a plan that was systematically subverted by the World Bank acting for the empire. So those are just some of the reflections that he provided for us to actually move forward with and how to deal with what is going on. Because now the ball has started rolling for America's new administration to have their interactions and relations with the African continent. This comes to us from the Council of Foreign Relations. And I'm just making you all aware through current events of these developments that are taking place, all right? We need to understand the geopolitical landscape. We need to understand the global economic landscape, okay? Because all this affects even your spiritual life, okay? So these are things that we're going to contextualize at the summation of this particular podcast. We're going to bring this into summation. But right now, we're just dealing with the current events. We'll contextualize it as we draw to a close. But this article was printed on the 14th by John Campbell from the Council on Foreign Relations website. It's called Africa's Presidential Phone Calls, okay? This is from a section that they have on the CFR website called Africa in Transition. They got their eyes on the continent, people. The question is, why do we not have our eyes on our continent? But he goes on to write, and again, this is by John Campbell, that Africa featured not at all in the U.S. presidential campaign. It wasn't even a feature in any point that was made. And the Trump administration has been silent about the continent since the inauguration. There's no focus that is being placed on Africa on the overt side. Covertly, that's a completely different matter, okay? But hence, for American Friends of Africa, it was encouraging that President Trump spoke with the presidents of Africa's 2 largest economies on February 13. Notice who he targeted in his conversations. The 2 largest economies. Remember, he's a national economist, so he's got something to gain by speaking with these 2 largest economic country leaders. So, however, there has been no White House explanation as to why the president chose the chiefs of state of those 2 particular countries. Arguably, the United States has a closer security relationship with Kenya. As of February 14, the White House has released few details about the conversations, while there have been only brief reports from Nigerian and South African sources. This is not unusual. Details of communications among heads of state are rarely made public. Both conversations must have been short. According to the White House schedule, the president talked to Nigeria's Muhammad Buhari. We'll come back to him as well, because there's some real issues that the African continent is having with the Nigerian president, Buhari, okay? And we'll get to that in the close of this matter, because this is a crucial matter, particularly as relates to Israelites, all right? And we'll discuss that why. But at 9:45 a.m., he had his conversation with Buhari, and to South Africa's Jacob Zuma at 10:30 a.m. Most of the remainder of President Trump's day was involved with the visit of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The February 13 focus on Africa telephone calls appears to follow a White House pattern of geographical consolidation. Over the weekend and earlier in the week, President Trump or Vice President Pence talked to the heads of state of Colombia and Brazil. There's a lot of African people in those countries as well. According to South African sources, the president talked about strengthening the already strong diplomatic relationship, and President Zuma referred to the 600 U.S. companies at present operating in South Africa. 600 U.S. companies are in South Africa. I bet you didn't know that. So these are things that we need to understand and see what is taking place, because that is a colonial still a measure that is being done there. So few outside observers would characterize the bilateral relationship as already strong. It's not. If Nigerian reports are accurate, the conversation between Presidents Trump and Buhari was much more significant. According to a Nigerian presidential spokesman, President Trump assured the Nigerian president of U.S. willingness to cut a new deal in helping Nigeria in terms of military weapons to combat terrorism. There's an article that came out today that it said Boko Haram and the Nigerian military are one and the same. All right. So very interesting as we see that taking place there in the fight against terrorism. The Obama administration and parts of the U.S. Congress have been reluctant to sell certain types of military equipment that the Nigerians wish to buy. It remains to be seen how the necessary generalities of the two presidents' conversation translates into a policy change. So this is just something that took place this week. And what will take place and ensue from that is something that we have to really watch as it develops, because it will develop in a way that will be more advantageous, not to Africa, but to the imperial presence of the United States. So with that in mind, we're going to go to an article from African Perspectives, and we're going to deal with an article that's entitled Why Africa Must Confront Trump Without Delay. There must be no delay in Africa's confrontation with President-elect Donald Trump. Give me one moment as I'm having just a couple computer challenges here. Some pop-ups and some delayed loading. But again, we're looking at this focus on Africa, from Black Power to Pan-Africanism and the geopolitical reality of Africa and the primacy of its liberation as a people and as a continent, so that as a people we can actually receive our international respect. So in many African languages, there are proverbs admonishing us to love our mothers regardless of how ugly they might be. Patriots are expected to show the same unflinching love for their countries. By extension, citizens of these countries are supposed to reserve the same kind of patriotic love for any union of countries trying to advance. So this is from The Citizen in Tanzania, content provided by AsiaNet Pakistan. Okay, so continuing on. Citizens of those countries are supposed to reserve the same kind of patriotic love for any union of countries trying to advance a common agenda. It defeats logic that the just concluded 28th African Union Summit in Ethiopia did not see it prudent to officially condemn the action by President Trump to ban citizens from two of its members from entering the U.S. simply because a majority of their citizens happen to be Muslims. There was no condemnation issue. As a matter of fact, 90 Somalis were deported as of the signing of the immigration ban. Now, there's some mixed voices that are coming out about this matter as relates to some Syrians even who are actually, if I'm not mistaken, there's some Syrians who are utilizing fake passports and visas who are actually more of the terrorist type to come into the United States. So they're saying that Trump actually, vetting this process more and actually deporting some can actually serve to protect the borders of the United States. Whereas there are some true and honest and sincere refugees who are seeking refuge, who do not have the opportunity to do such thing because they are being deported. So it doesn't matter that these countries are poor and donor dependent. There's pride in speaking up against wrongs that are targeted at part of your community. In an African sense, you cannot run away from your own ugliness. It belongs to none other than you. Everybody else must accept you as you are. History tells us that Europe's chaotic past has some striking similarities to what is happening today in the Middle East, and also Northeast Africa, and to some extent Asia and parts of Europe. Now, during World War I and World War II, when Europe was being bombarded by bombs and military boots on the ground, guess where many Europeans fled? They fled to North Africa by the droves, and they were welcomed into the borders as refugees seeking sanctuary, seeking refuge. But now that you're having these wars that are being financed for profit and to acquire the resources, the refugees that are there seeking refuge are being denied. It's a very slippery slope, I understand, but we have to look at the human condition and the human element that is still involved here. Continuing, the forefathers of the promoters of the Americas ultra-right movements were themselves refugees who had run away from the wars, hunger, and disease in Europe, who were accepted by the Indians as they were. And all European Americans are immigrants. So let's be clear about that. Many of them sought refuge. So they were refugees. The United States is largely a country of immigrants who arrived over the course of the last 500 years, and the contributions that immigrants continue to make in the U.S. economy is enormous. The U.S. technology companies started by first and second generation immigrants include Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Oracle, IBM, Uber, Yahoo, EMC, eBay, AT&T, Tesla, and Reddit, just to name but a few. The list contains virtually the entire tech sector in the U.S. No one, therefore, has a moral right to discriminate against any other on the basis of religion. American corporations, perhaps the African Union, has selective amnesia, or perhaps African Union leaders have never stumbled upon Martin Niemöller's famous quotation, else they would have acted swiftly and responded to Trump's actions. Niemöller is a prominent 20th century German Protestant pastor who became an outspoken critic of Adolf Hitler. He spent more than 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps, and in his reflection, he said, first, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not socialist. Then they came for the trade unions, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The Most High knows who President Trump will target next, and we know that there's tanks on the ground in Chicago now. This has been reported in alternative media outlets. The federal troops are in Chicago. So who is he targeting now? So by then, the African Union will have no moral authority to fight anyone. By not officially admonishing President Trump, the AU selectively endorses his actions on their very own brothers and sisters. It is true that countries targeted by the U.S. have challenges to which several countries, including Kenya, have lost many lives. However, the approach that the Trump administration has taken is by no means guaranteed to stop terror attacks. It presents opportunities not to innocent citizens, but to the terrorists to rain terror on innocent people globally, including inside those countries, and we may never be able to gather intelligence from isolated countries. The first Americans to react were American corporations. These corporations have invested heavily across the world, including in Africa. Some of the talent they have comes from Africa. In essence, Africa is not a powerless beggar. It has leverage, just like Europe, and must learn to speak out whenever it is affronted. However, the AU's ineptitude must end if Africa is to become an equal partner on the world stage. And this is why leadership is so important. Going back to that, we must be curious, we must be adaptable, we must be courageous and bold and focused on the group, not just your personal interests, which is what most leaders today, unfortunately, are doing. Although the outgoing AU Commission head in Kozana, Dlamini Zuma, blasted the U.S. in her remarks at the meeting, it was not enough. This is what she said. The very country to which many of our people were taken as slaves during the transatlantic slave trade has now decided to ban refugees from some of our countries. Now that's prophetic, really, because you got to understand those people were indeed us, okay? And those people that they took were a lot of the times Israelites. History proves that, okay? Prophecy proves that. But compare that with the European Union Council President Donald Tusk, which he said separately. He said the bloc must take spectacular steps to avoid disintegration. Strategic decisions. He added that if this did not happen, separated European nations would become dependent on the U.S., China, and Russia, and noted that the U.S. under Trump was among the external threats to the EU. Africa must wake up to the fact that Trump has pretty smart fellows who have a specific strategy with which to control the world on their own terms, and to do that, they must disrupt the status quo. Experts in strategy would tell you that the series of executive orders isn't exactly the big deal that ordinary citizens making it out to be. They are just a smokescreen meant to hoodwink not just Americans, but the entire world, while the Trump White House works on the real disruptive policies that will impact the world for years to come. We must be vexed about what they are not saying. Remember that what Trump is leading is a movement, if not a revolution. We must therefore not react to Trump's agenda in piecemeal. Listen to this analysis. This is crucial. Don't get caught up with all these little issues. We have to keep the bigger picture in mind. There's a bigger picture to this. Some serious strategic decisions must be taken and adopted by regional bodies like the AU before we find the entire world in complete disarray. In so doing, the AU can learn from the EU, which has already sounded some warnings. The notion that America had the moral right over many countries is gone. The emerging narcissist movements don't care. If the South Sudanese people or Central Africa Republic slaughter their own, they will say, let the barbarians do what they know. It is up to us to change and perhaps begin to emulate what the Economic Commission of West Africa states, the ECOWAS, did to liberate the small Gambian Republic. Never in the history of Africa have we seen neighboring countries ensuring political justice as had happened in the Gambia. They got rid of their president, who had been sitting as president for years. The people rose up and removed their president. But dealing with Burundi, we must never wait for other people to solve our internal conflicts. As Buddha says, this person quotes Buddha, it is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. Then the victory is yours. It cannot be taken from you, not by angels or by demons, heaven or hell. It may well be that Trump is a blessing in disguise that will eventually see Africa deal with her own problems. Imagine if East African countries intervened in Burundi to save lives and restore justice. We were not honest in dealing with Burundi, which is why the region floundered on the election of the AU chairperson. We cannot wait for others to fight on our behalf. It is a sign of defeat when we fail to make our voice heard on the injustice to our neighbors. And this is why the Torah is so essential to this, because we know that we must seek justice at all times. We know that we must love our neighbors as ourselves. That is the golden rule. We know that we must bring forth the moral imperative in dealing with humanity. That's what Israel's role is. So we can even learn from our colonizer, Britain, where the people have petitioned the Queen not to welcome the U.S. president to Britain. A photo opportunity with Queen Elizabeth II is a huge endorsement which Donald Trump desperately needs. The AU silence is an endorsement of what Trump is doing. Africa must join the rest of the world in defending the rights of humanity. American poet and philosopher Susie Kasem sums up the true nature of being in the world we live in the following terms. Quote, the truth is, there is good and bad in everybody, in every nation, in every race, and in every religion. To hear someone say that all the people that belong to a certain country, race, or religion are bad is extremely untruthful It makes the person making the statement lose credibility right away. We are all flawed, and even nature is flawed. Nobody is perfect, and no country, race, or religion is perfect. Duality and polarity are imprinted in everything in nature, in all humans, and even within ourselves. For example, there are those who are ignorant and those who are wise. Very interesting article, because there was some matters that says that our Pan-African leaders of the past are actually rolling in their graves as a result of the AU not voicing any type of condemnation on what just took place. But all of this, again, it comes down to who's bankrolling this matter. That's what we have to look at as well. Who's bankrolling this matter? And so we're going to go to an article from the Activist Post. And we're going to deal again with leadership. This article is entitled, Great Political Leaders Always, and Social Leaders Always Call Out the Bankers. This is by Dylan Charles. Dylan writes, a common thread between many of the world's great political and social leaders is their willingness to call out the major banks and bankers for their complicity in establishing and maintaining economic tension and international conflict in our world. Let's keep in mind that this administration that is currently in the White House is composed of billionaires and generals. So you can see an agenda right at hand, all right? So this is a modern crusade backed with fascist types of energy and ideologies that is meant to steamroll this world. So let's keep our eyes open. But again, a common thread between many of the world's great political and social leaders is their willingness to call out the major banks and bankers for their complicity in establishing and maintaining economic tension and international conflict in our world. Yahushua whipped the money changers when he drove them from the temple for turning his father's house into a den of thieves. And since the days of Messiah, history is the story of a never-ending struggle between the houses of finance and public interest. Bottom line, banks are in a unique position of power in our world and can generate extraordinary profits without actually producing a thing. They're bankrupt. All they have is a system of ledgers. Okay? That's all that they're operating on. Ledgers. Through the issuance of currency and credit, they can control the amount of money available to the economy and create economic booms and busts, seizing titles to land, homes, businesses, and property. They hold extraordinary influence over government for their role as financiers of everything from public works to war, and enjoy extraordinary pecuniary advantage and privilege. The few who understand the system will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. This is from the Rothschild brothers of London in 1863. There's a disillusionment that takes place. But consider the following statements against banking establishments by some of America's or history's great social and political leaders. Thomas Jefferson said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, which it does now, the Federal Reserve is not a part of the federal government. It's as federal as the FedEx, the Federal Express agency that delivers packages. But they're the ones who print the money, not the U.S. Treasury. But again, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Now, of course, he's speaking about Europeans. He didn't give a squat about us as African people. But I believe Jefferson writes that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom the property belongs. This is from Thomas Jefferson again. Andrew Jackson said, now keep in mind, these are all slave owners, so, I'm taking their words with a pinch of salt as relates to its reality dealing with us. But when you're dealing with their line of people, then you know what they're saying is real. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, Andrew Jackson says, I will rout you out. Andrew Jackson said that to a delegation of bankers discussing the recharter of the Second Bank of the United States. Abraham Lincoln was an advocate of federal banking over private banking in an ongoing effort against the tyranny of the banking cartels. He renounced the bankers' insistence on charging 24 to 36% interest on money borrowed to carry out the Civil War, and was assassinated within a year of establishing the greenback to sidestep the influence of private banks. It wasn't because of slavery that Lincoln got popped. Same reason that Kennedy got popped, because he signed Executive Order 11-110, which brought the silver standard back. But Abraham Lincoln said the government should issue and circulate all the currency and credits needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest. Money will cease to be master and become the servant of humanity. Abraham Lincoln. I could read on, but I'm going to leave that article there, because what we're seeing, and I do want to read from Kennedy. This is something I found very interesting. As a matter of fact, we did a lesson, an offering on this not too long ago, that John F. Kennedy, in his last speech, or his speech to the correspondence dinner, was very powerful. But John F. Kennedy spoke out against the bankers, attempting to strip them of their power to print currency, and many attribute his demands for metals-backed currency as one of the primary reasons he was shortly thereafter assassinated in Daley Plaza. JFK's speech against secret societies, combined with Executive Order 11-110, which I was just talking about, are signs that he was engaged in a confrontation against powerful financial interests operating outside the law. This is what he said. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. No war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear and its presence has never been more imminent. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly effective machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. You can think of these whistleblowers right now, these leakers which got Flynn, the Secretary Flynn caused him to resign. The leakers are being completely castigated, and they're attempted to be silenced. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. And that is again from JFK and his 35th president, who was the 35th president of the United States, which he gave to the American Newspaper Publishers Association on April 27th, 1961. All right. But I'm going to go ahead and leave that one there and move to my next article. I'm presenting this entire globe. We were looking at this in a very, very broad spectrum as relates to Africa and its struggle for liberation. All right, this is a very interesting article that I found yesterday on the Black Agenda Report website. It is called Human Rights Industry Protects Imperialism. The human rights industry protects imperialism. That's just like almost an oxymoron. How can a human rights industry protect the murderers who are known as the imperialists? This is by Bar editor and senior columnist Margaret Kimberly. She writes, humanity is in desperate need of individuals and organizations to speak up for their right to live free from the threat of state violence. Very profound opening statement. Instead, we have a human rights industrial complex which speaks for the powerful and tells lies in order to justify their aggressions. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are at the top of this infamous list. They have a pattern and practice of giving cover for regime change schemes hatched by the United States, NATO partners, and Gulf monarchies like Saudi Arabia. Amnesty International recently released a report, Human Slaughterhouse, Mass Hangings and Extermination at Saydania Prison, Syria, which claimed that the Syrian government executed between 5,000 and 13,000 people over a 5-year period. The report is based on anonymous sources outside of Syria, hearsay, and the dubious use of satellite photos reminiscent of Colin Powell's performance at the United Nations in 2003. There is plenty of hyperbolic language like slaughterhouse and extermination, but scant evidence of the serious charges being made. Human Rights Watch joined the fray just days later with claims that the Syrian government used chlorine gas against civilians fleeing Aleppo. Once again, the claims had little evidence, just mud thrown against the wall in the hope that some of it will stick. We're talking about fake news now because you got to understand the role that propaganda plays in the demonization of the African continent and the cover that's used to hide and bury the real crimes that are being committed against humanity. We'll put the focus over here so that the shadow is cast over what is being done over here. All right. It is the al-Nusra Front which attacked the Aleppo refugees as they struggled to get within the Syrian army lines. One day there was a report on execution, another day chemical weapons, barrel bombs, the next day, and so on. These phony organizations never mentioned that the humanitarian catastrophe in Syria was brought about by Western intervention, imperialism, and its head-chopping jihadist allies. The Syrian war isn't over, but that government and its allies are winning, and they will determine the future of that nation. It is Russia, Turkey, and Iran who are convening peace talks between Syria and the opposition, and that is why the effort to discredit them goes on. Beginning in the 2011 United States, the U.S. used a tried and true method of getting support for imperialism. A foreign leader is accused of being a tyrant who terrorizes his nation. The claims silence critics, get buy-in from corporate media and cynical politicians, and ultimately lead to death at the hands of the so-called saviors. There are 9 million Syrian refugees precisely because of collusion between the West and its Gulf monarchy allies. The suffering of the civilian population is the fault of these parties, and it is only the determination of the Syrians and help from their allies which prevented it from going the way of Libya. And they're saying that Muammar Gaddafi's son is one who can actually remedy the crisis situation that's taking place in in Libya. Now that the jihadists are on the run and their one-time backer Turkey has switched sides, the jig is up. But the imperialists will not go away quietly. That is why Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International reappear at a crucial moment. Now, new President Donald Trump is quite literally a wild card. During his campaign, he claimed he would not support regime change, but his personality and policy are erratic. It is never clear what he means or wants. His staff are equally amateurish in the direction of American foreign policy. is anyone's guess. One day he wants better relations with Russia, and the next he makes a futile demand that it turn Crimea to its neo-Nazi overlords. But Republicans and Democrats in the War Party are quite clear on their plans. They are not giving up in their quest for hegemony, and they need all the credibility they can get. Enter Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch to provide propaganda at just the right moment. If they were at all serious in their stated goal of giving voice to the abused, they could use their ample resources to criticize the United States domestically and around the world. When President George Bush instigated the invasion of Iraq in 1991, they repeated the fable of soldiers killing babies in incubators. They never explained or apologized for their actions. They continued their awful partnership in 2011 when they provided cover for the Obama administration's attack on and destruction of Libya, which is in Africa. Neither organization will denounce the American carceral state, the world's worst. They might attack the modern-day police slave patrol, which kills 3 people every day. They could ask why the United States has an implicit right to decide that Libya or Syria or Somalia can be destroyed and their populations be forced to suffer. But taking on those issues would be in defiance of their true mission, creating the conditions necessary to allow the United States to commit aggressions without fear or public opposition. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are not friendly to the people of the world. They pick on the weak and the targets of imperialist attack and tell lies on behalf of those who violate human rights on a mass scale. Despite playing a lead role in the Syrian disaster, the United States was invited to be an observer at the upcoming peace talks. Enter Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch to help make sure that if the Trump administration should participate, it won't be making any changes they need worry about. The human rights industry complex is dependably on the side of the evildoers and their dirty deeds. Empire. This is all about empire, people. And they have all the machines that they need, from propaganda to military to the financiers. Whatever they need, it's in place. So we have to start organizing and developing solidarity so that we can prevent this attack, especially in light of this next article that I'm about to read, which comes to us from Global Black History. It's called 21st Century Colonialism, the New Scramble for Africa 3.0. Very insightful article. This comes to us again from Global Black History. The article says the following. During the last scramble for Africa in 1884, which again was the Berlin Conference led by Otto von Bismarck and their carving up of the African continent, European powers met in Berlin to discuss the rules of invading and taking over territory in Africa. There were no Africans invited to the table. In 1947, the scramble for Africa 2.0 began when Western nations led by the United States and its NATO allies fought Russia. United States and Russia took their fight into ideological territory, and when African countries sought to attain independence from colonialism, Russia and China were there with ammunition and an alternate philosophy of governance to the brutal, barbaric Western colonial regimes. In the century, we have a new scramble for Africa occurring. The scramble for Africa 3.0 is not being televised. You don't hear nothing about Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch talking about the atrocities that are taking place in the scramble for Africa 3.0, which is not being televised, and though it is not directly apparent when exactly it began, the effects on the African continent are well evident. Okay, this is why that our last article was read, because while you're hearing these parrots talk about what they are being told to talk about as far as these human rights violations, nothing is being said about what's going on in Africa. Not in the mainstream media. France never left the continent, even after African independence, and it still has a large footprint on the continent. Pan-Afrique is the term that is used to describe the effect of France on the African continent. Facts about France and Africa. France holds the reserves of 14 African nations. France has countless military bases across the continent. France created narrative of political instability in Africa when it participated in 16 coups in which legitimate anti-French leaders were deposed in favor of puppets that were in line with French imperial agenda. French-sponsored coups took place in Central African Republic, Mali, Togo, Burkina Faso, Zaire, Congo, with the help of the Americans. Now, facts about China in Africa. In 1990s, in its quest for global dominance, China joined the Scramble for Africa 3.0 with their policy of economic advancement and non-interference in politics. China has invested between $10 to $200 billion in infrastructure in Africa. China has invested $3.5 billion to upgrade the port of East Africa. China is contributing to the construction of the East Africa Railway, which is expected to be a 750-kilometer cost, about $4 billion in order to connect Ethiopia to Djibouti. China is also assisting in the $13 billion Kenya Railway, which will link Mombasa to Nairobi. This will increase regional trade in East Africa, and it is actually much needed for Africa. So you can see the differences of investment and interaction in the African continent. Facts about the United States in Africa. When the United States realized that Africa was the next frontier and it had no foothold on the continent, President Lincoln introduced AGOA to signal friendly tone from Washington after Reagan had been friendly to the apartheid government. Relations with Africa were cold and strained. U.S. military aid to Africa is the new strategy that America is employing to gain a foothold into Africa. AGOA did not take off as Americans would have wanted, and so the Bush administration set up military bases in Djibouti and Botswana under AFRICOM under the guise of stopping the spread of terrorism. U.S. strategy into African occupation is security, while the Chinese occupy through promises of economic advancement, and the French make the same old promises of helping to spread democracy. It isn't that democracy is not important. Democracy is the foundation of advancement in any society, but when it comes from the colonial master, many are skeptical. The African nations continue to welcome their partners because they feel that they can come in peace. However, many citizens are beginning to realize that just as the first colonialists said they came in peace, their ancestors soon found their mines and cattle and land in foreign hands. Africans realize that those who do not learn from their history are bound to make the mistakes of the past. The continent has now entered a new phase of colonialism 3.0. When, as a people, are we going to learn? When are we going to come to the understanding that we must be self-determined, that we must be self-sufficient, that we must be united in our collective effort to make Africa great again? We hear all this talk about make America great. Well, where's the talk about making Africa great? Why is that not being spouted by people of African ancestry? Is it because we have African ambivalence? Is it because we have been taught to believe that Africa has nothing to do with us and that we were sold by African people, as opposed to being beguiled by the people who had the economic interests and the satanic desire to separate us from our consciousness and our culture and our heritage and our language? This next article, going back to the African Executive, talks about this colonial displacement. It's called Land Displacement and Conflicts Between Companies and Local Communities in Africa. Now again, this is the same thing that takes place in the United States. We call it gentrification here, okay? But the same model, the same paradigm, the same agenda is also taking place in the continent. Matter of fact, Dr. John Henry Clark once said the only difference between African people in the continent and African people in the diaspora is that the people in the diaspora were taken from the land, whereas the people in the continent, the land was taken from them. We have more things in common than we don't. And it would behoove us as African people to establish solidarity with one another, to unite, to come together. So this article, again, from the African Executive, is written by the Rights and Resource Initiative. This is a research article here. Land displacement and conflicts between companies and local communities in Africa. I'm not going to read this entire article, but I want us to get an idea about this African gentrification that's taking place. All right. 63% of disputes related to private sector land and natural resource investments in Africa began when communities were forced to leave their lands, according to new research released today by TMP Systems and the Rights and Resources Initiative. African governments are competing for investment to spur economic development and improve living standards, says TMP Systems CEO Lou Munden. But most countries need to radically improve the governance of tenure rights to create an attractive and stable investment environment. Companies and investors who increasingly understand that unclear tenure rights create financial and reputational risks need to do more to identify and respond to these implicit challenges in emerging market investments. Now, on the flip side, skipping these countries and investors, these companies and investors, we need the people and the leadership of the people to step up and adapt to these challenges that are being faced and know how to move forward for the sake of the interest of the people. This is imperative. The research also found that areas targeted for development in Africa are more heavily populated than similar developments elsewhere in the world. The population density within a 50-kilometer radius of disputed projects in Africa was more than twice the global average, 816,547 people compared with 319,426 people globally. For West Africa, the average was over 1 million people. So this displacement that is taking place in Africa far outweighs the displacement of other peoples otherwhere. And so we need to be mindful of this and know how to address this issue, this crisis, this imperially created crisis. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with multinational corporations who are part of these empires that are coming in to reap massive profits. The mistaken belief that Africa is a continent of empty, freely available land open for development has done so much harm, says RRI coordinator Andy White. No land is unclaimed, and uprooting communities without their consent from their lands and traditional livelihoods creates conflicts and social unrest. Recognizing and securing local people's property rights instead provides security for governments, investors, and companies, a critical need given all the political uncertainty in the world today. The same thing that we're experiencing here is the same thing that our brothers are experiencing over in the continent. It's the same thing that they experienced in Brazil with the Olympics, in which they displaced millions of African people in Brazil from their favelas. This displacement is global. So if we're just focusing on little old America and saying, oh, woe is me, we have to look at what our people are suffering from in this world. Because we are a human race. And we have to understand if an injustice is done in one place, it affects justice in every place. And this is where Israel has to come on the forefront and the vanguard and proclaim righteousness and proclaim justice, and not only proclaim it, but to seek to bring it to this particular creation. And I'm not going to read the rest of this because we see what's going on. In the report, is dire. It will be in the text box so you can read this article on your own. And we'll get to that at another time. But in terms of speaking out against injustice and the type of leadership that we need, I want to focus on an Israelite that is in Nigeria. One of the powerful and the two countries that was spoken to recently by President-elect Donald Trump. There's a region in Africa, and in Nigeria particularly, called Biafra. And these Biafrans have awakened to their Hebrew Israelite heritage. They know that they're Hebrews. And they have a political prisoner who has been an outspoken critic of the Buhari regime. And his name is Nnamdi Kanu. And this article is entitled Biafra. Only Nnamdi Kanu and IPOB can confront Nigeria government as Two-Face canceled his proposed protest. This article was written on the 8th of February. It is by Lucky Iki. He says, he was pondering within myself in my quiet moment, brainstorming, and asked myself several questions to actually affirm, conclude, or reason out at least half a single good fact why I should be proud of Nigeria or be addressed as Nigeria. Sincerely, I could not ascertain any good reasons for over 2 hours of my nonstop scientific questioning about this entity called Nigeria. He's reflecting on the country of which he is a part of. Are we doing that same thing? Do we call ourselves Americans in light of the historical relationship that we've had with this country? Are we proud to do so? Recently, I read in several online news about a proposed protest by Innocent Ndibia, aka Two-Face. The proposed protest was given a maximum publicity all over the contraception or the contraption called Nigeria. Shortly, I heard again that Two-Face Ndibia was backed out from the proposed protest, and this is a fact and confirmation that there is no man like the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, who single-handedly confronted the evil entity called Nigeria and her evil and bloodthirsty leaders not minding the dangers of their murderous security guards. Recall that before Mazi Nnamdi Kanu fearlessly confronted the contraption called Nigeria and her evil leaders, he announced the day and the date of his arrival, not minding the threats and the grave danger it poses. Indeed, with this, the indigenous people of Biafra and her leader, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, has proven to the contraption called Nigeria and the world at large that Biafra is going to be a strong and formidable nation on earth when fully restored. I want to reiterate that no one is called Nigerian and no one is ready to die for Nigeria, not even their so-called Nigerian leaders who always sing praises for one Nigeria. None of these leaders of the one Nigerian can give out their life for Nigeria or even stand on the part of the truth, just as Mazi Nnamdi Kanu and the indigenous people of Biafra have given out their respective lives time without number. For these reasons, no leader in the contraption called Nigeria and her citizens is a match to Mazi Nnamdi Kanu and the indigenous people of Biafra. Now, who is this Nnamdi Kanu? Well, let's do a little background before we get into this. And it's so interesting that this outspoken leader, who is a political prisoner, has recently been, not recently, but he's been in prison for some time. But this article that we're about to read from Israel Rising is going to let you know, that was printed on February 12th of this year by Clifford Aderoanya, that he is now attempted to be assassinated, as this article says, by the British. Are the British trying to assassinate Biafra's Hebrew Israelite leader. He knows who he is. And again, Clifford Aroyana says the indigenous people of Biafra can authoritatively state that the British government has revised its original plan of using non-traceable poison to assassinate Nnamdi Kanu to a new plan of direct assassination using Boko Haram terrorists who are in custody in Kuje prison. Now, again, we just talked about the connection between the Boko Haram military or militia, the jihadist group, and the Nigerian army. Okay? The assassination will be carried out in the form of a state-managed prison escape of detained Boko Haram terrorists. The new plan is to bring other members of Boko Haram living in northern Nigeria to storm the Kuje prison and instigate a prison jailbreak, which will result in the exchange of gunfire between them and security agencies, during which Nnamdi Kanu will be purportedly caught in the crossfire. We repeat with all finality that the British government is the mastermind of this plan. Our highly reliable and impeccable intelligence sources reveal that the British government was rattled by the revelations we made through our press release of January 6, 2017, where we exposed their original plan to stealthily administer a non-traceable poison on Nnamdi Kanu. This was supposed to happen before the swearing-in of President Donald Trump of the USA. Our embedded intelligence source tipped off the leadership hierarchy of IPOB of this new plan, and the tip-off was corroborated by the smokescreen terrorist attack alert announced by Muhammad Buhari's information minister, Mr. Lai Mohammed. On the 10th of February 2017, an online newspaper, Sahara reporters, quoted Lai Mohammed as saying that the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist group and an affiliate of Boko Haram, is planning to attack banks, arms depot, and prison across the country with bombs and high-caliber weapons. Mr. Lai also stated that further intelligence monitoring has revealed that members of the Muslim Brotherhood are planning to forcefully free their members who are in detention in Koji, Abuja, and Kaduna, including one, Beli Aminu, an IED expert for the group who is now at Kuje prison. From this tongue-in-cheek revelations coming out of the lying mouth of Lai Mohammed, it is obvious that this is a well-choreographed plan to assassinate the leader of IPOB, Nnamdi Kanu, and pass it on to the jailbreak attempts of detained Boko Haram terrorists. This heinous crime of trying to snuff the life out of the IPOB leader is because Muhammadu Buhari, his murderous state security services, and the incompetent Justice Binta Mortalu Nyako have all realized that they shall lose the court case they initiated against Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. Buhari and crew have tried every trick in their empty brains, but have continuously met with total failure because the hands of Nnamdi Kanu are clean. We must remind the world that at every stage of their actions, Buhari and crew have always consulted with and taken counsel, strategies, and advice from the British government. Having failed on all counts, especially with the exposure of our press statement of January 6, 2017, the British government has now advised Buhari to activate this latest plan of using Boko Haram terrorists to do their dirty job for them. But the interesting thing here is that this same Nnamdi Kanu is a British citizen and is supposed to be protected by the British government. Then why does the British government want their citizen dead? Has it got to do with the stealing of Biafran resources by the Hausa Fulani oligarchy and stashing away the money in British banks, which Nnamdi Kanu has mentioned severally over Radio Biafra? Or is it the fear of revelations of atrocities committed by the British government between 1967 and 1970, which Nnamdi promised to do? Perhaps it may be that with Nnamdi Kanu still alive and eventually released by his kidnapper, Muhammadu Buhari, he will campaign for the stoppage of stolen money from Biafra land, which flows daily into British economy and which sustains their NHS and other government agencies. Once again, we alert the world that the British government is doing everything and anything to kill Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. With this latest plan, we are putting it on the record that the life of Nnamdi Kanu is on a cliffhanger and the British government is behind every move to assassinate him. We call upon conscientious people and leaders all over the world to advise the British government to withdraw from their evil plan of trying to kill Nnamdi Kanu. Finally, we affirm our determination to restore the nation of Biafra. Therefore, the British government and their Nigerian collaborators will never stop us. The nation of Biafra is our God-given inheritance, and nobody or government will stop us from taking back our nation, not even the British government and their continuous attempts to assassinate Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. Very powerful article, because what they're demonstrating in their leadership is their ideological stance, their organized effort to go about bringing forth an alternative reality. In this next article from the Biafra Telegraph further corroborates that, in which they say in this article, no force of arms can crush the will of a determined and united Biafra. And this is something that we must understand as well, that we must know that no weapon formed against us shall prosper. We must have the faith and the understanding in the knowledge of the Torah of the Most High, that if we are doing His will, if we're carrying out His precepts and living our life according to the righteous standards of the Torah, then we will manifest the reality that has been called. This article by Nwaiwu Chiukwe Wikibuka, sorry if I ruined it, but says the following: Biafra existed 5,000 years ago. In other words, Biafra means come and let us join. The word Bia is an Igbo language, which means come. And the word Fra is an Idru language, which means also let us join. I can state it categorically clear that Biafra entirely means come, let us join ourselves to the Most High in a perpetual covenant that will not be forgotten. Even the Holy Scriptures describe Biafra as come and let us join. According to the book of Jeremiah 50, verse 5, it says, they shall ask the way to Zion with their faces towards it, saying, come and let us join ourselves to Yah in a perpetual covenant that will not be forgotten. Biafra is a divine mandate, the kingdom of Elohim here on the planet Earth, which can never be subdued or crushed by force of arms. Biafra is comprised of Ijo, Igbo, Inang, Idoma, Itchekiri, Ifik, Ibibio, Igala, etc. It is known as Southeast and South-South. Biafrans are determined and united people before the devilish Britain came and destroyed their egos by amalgamating them into one almighty mess called Nigeria. To others, it is an ideology which can never be defeated by guns and prison cells. Millions have paid with their dear lives. Many lost their hard-earned property. Thousands are incarcerated unlawfully for no just cause. Many have been kidnapped by Nigerian armed forces, and many are in prison extrajudicially. Since the year 1967, Nigerian government has never stopped using her murderous security agencies to massacre innocent Biafrans on the name to keep Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate as one indivisible contraption, a man-made country called Nigeria. It was on record that more than 4 million Biafrans were killed during the Biafran-Nigerian Civil War just because Biafrans asked for their self-determination, which is undeniable as a right of every citizen. On the 9th day of February 2015, the IPOB members gathered in National High in Aba to observe their prayers. The tyrant President Muhammadu Buhari ordered his murderous armed forces to shoot at unarmed indigenous people of Biafra, which left more than 50 dead. Others were seriously injured. Where was that in the news? Where was that by the Amnesty International? Where was that broadcast by Human Rights Watch? Nothing was heard about this. This has just happened last week. Meanwhile, on the 30th of May 2016, Buhari repeated the same act of wickedness by killing more than 80 IPOB members during their Remembrance Day of their dead heroes and heroines at Nkopor Anambra State, Biafra land. Just recently, many were shot dead by murderous Nigerian task forces during their Biafra Trump solidarity rally in Igiwocha, Biafra land. Biafra is a mystery which no one has full knowledge of it except the Supreme Creator. Biafra is the last hope of human race, the last miracle of the Most High, and the kingdom of the Most High here on the planet Earth. That's what the word Biafra means to all Biafrans. That's why Biafrans are willing to give their dear lives to protect her integrity. Nigerian government been so daft in idiocy because they thought using military options to fight Biafrans will obliterate their mentality towards Biafra, having no clue that killing us will only strengthen our zeal towards it. And to some of us, Biafra means total emancipation, liberation of all enslaved people, and the last hope of a common man. It's a religion to the people that knows her secret. That's the reasons Biafra can't be crushed by forces of arms, because their zeal is beyond imagination. Biafrans are now more determined and united to restore her God-given nation. No forms of intimidation, incarceration, extrajudicial killings can crush the will of determined and united Biafrans. It is either Biafra or the zoo. Sink no middle ground about it. This is what the writer writes as relates to their push for freedom. And we're going to end with this last article here, which is entitled Enemies Among Us, Biafra. We're going to bring the focus from Africa now to these Israelites who are in Nigeria called the Biafrans. They are Igbos, and they know that they are Israelites. This article was written today. It is a feature on the Biafra Telegraph. The writer says, the world is not a perfect place for many living things because species fight for survival and the weakest are the ones bound to be extinct. The world has drastically changed so much that you can seldom trust your fellow human being because they have chosen something different over their own survival. Wealth is good, but it depends on how you accumulate it and at whose expense. The struggle for the restoration of Biafra is a case in point. We, the people of Biafra, under the leadership of Nnamdi Kanu and the IPOB organization, have undertaken the task to make this a reality. We do understand the cost both materially and financially, and therefore, even with the detention of our leader, Nnamdi Kanu, we have progressed without fear. They are not a leader-centered group. They are a group-centered leadership. Because if they were to be self-reliant just on this one man, well, best believe their agency and their organism would have completely just folded. And I do mean organism because they are a collective of organs that have come together to function as one large organism. All right? The world is listening, and we are still sending messages so that the whole world will know that what we have been going through under the hands of those who are proclaiming for indivisible one Nigeria on the one hand, and then mercilessly butchering the same people with the other hand. We have enemies amongst us. Any Biafran who, due to the fact that he illegally acquired wealth and puts his wealth first before the progress and safety of the Biafrans, is your enemy. Any politician running for whatever post in Nigeria and who failed to fight for his freedom, but rather wants meaningless political status in a dead country, is your enemy because he has no morals or sense of direction. He is selfish and therefore your enemy. We must look at our misleadership class like that as well. When the people are not the true interest, and they put the personal interests of their political clout ahead of the people, they are your enemies. And we must mark our enemies, know them, and know them well, and know what to do with them. Any country that is aligned with your oppressor to subdue and suffocate you mentally and economically is your enemy. Anybody who claims to be a Biafran and dines with your enemy, tells the enemy your ins and your outs, is your enemy. Anybody who works rigorously to see that you fail in your struggle towards achieving liberation is your enemy. When you take money or promised position to work against your family. You deserve to hang or extinguish your life because you are not worth anything. We have no respect from you. You are the enemy amongst us. So now, many Biafran lives have been lost in this Nigeria more than any other race and continues to be lost daily. Can any of these old political dreamers can be alive if we Biafrans are the ones doing the killings? It defies logic how a coward who cannot speak out and defend his own people will turn around and ask you to forget your struggle and follow him and dine with the enemy and then perish with him. It is the philosophy of eat now and pay with your life later. Unity is strength, and just as the Northerners and their governors have united to completely enslave and wipe us out of existence, so have we Biafrans united to make sure we survive. We will not forget those people that have made this struggle very rocky due to their selfish and short-sightedness. We have given them a lot of chances to do the right thing, but the time is not on their side anymore. You cannot be on the fence, and Biafra is our home with or without you. We shall overcome and be victorious with the help of the Most High. Press on, boys. In conclusion, when we examine and focus out on Africa, and we take a look at the conditions that are being experienced in the continent of humanity's origin, not just our origin, but in the continent of humanity's origin, well then, what we can see is that it's the same program that is being enacted on the peoples by the oppressor. And we are sure and we know that the oppressor will fall. I want to take a look at a passage that comes to us from the book of Ecclesiastes. It's the 5th chapter of the book. And then we're going to read another passage from Isaiah. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, it writes as follows. If you see the oppression of the poor, and denial of right ruling, and righteousness in a province, do not be astonished at the matter, for a higher than the high is guarding, and there are higher ones over them. And the increase of the land is for all. The sovereign himself is served from the field. He who loves silver is not satisfied with silver, nor he who loves wealth and increase. That, too, is futile. With the increase of goods, there is an increase of those consuming them. What advantage then is there to their owners but to look on? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the plenty of the rich does not let him sleep. There is a sickly evil I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner, for his evil. But those riches perish through evil use, and he brings forth a son, and there is naught in his hand. As he came naked from his mother's womb, so he returns, to go as he came, and from his labor which goes into his hand, he takes none whatsoever. And this too is a grievous evil. Exactly as he came, so he goes. And what gain has he since he toiled for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and with much sorrow and sickness and wrath. See what I have seen. It is good and pleasant for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life which Elohim gives him, for it is his portion. Further, when Elohim has given any man riches and wealth, and permitted him to enjoy them, and to receive his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is a gift of Elohim. though it not be much, let him remember the days of his life, because Elohim bears witness by the gladness of his heart. And that passage is truly one to reflect on as relates to the oppression in a province, because we see it as we speak, and it is global. But I want to let the oppressor know. I want to let the gatherer of gold know that time has drawn near for an end to your devilment. And soon the recompense of the wicked will be made known, and the righteous will stand, and the righteous will rise, and the righteous will inherit the earth. But we must truly be engaged in the bringing forth of a new paradigm, in the bringing forth of a new kingdom, in the bringing forth of a new humanity. Isaiah 14, starting at the 3rd verse. Let's go back. Let's just go back to the first verse. It reads as follows: because Yah has compassion on Jacob, and shall again choose Israel, and give them rest in their own land. This is why we're focusing on Africa, because this is where we will return to the land of our origin, Northeast Africa, the promised land. And the strangers shall join them, and they shall cling to the house of Jacob. And people shall take them and bring them to their own place. And the house of Israel shall possess them for servants and female servants in the land of Yah. Not the land of our captivity, in the land of Yah. And they shall make captives of their captors and rule over their oppressors. Prepare yourself, Israel. And we will not rule them as they ruled us. We will rule them in justice. We will rule them in truth. We will rule them in righteousness. And it shall be, in the day Yah gives you rest from your sorrow and from your trouble and the hard service in which you were made to serve, that you shall take up this proverb against the sovereign of Babel, and say, how the oppressor has ceased. How the oppressor has ceased. The gold gatherer ceased. Yah has broken the staff of the wrong, the scepter of the rulers, he who smote the people in wrath with ceaseless blows. He who ruled the Gentiles in displeasure is persecuted, and no one restrains. All the earth is at rest and at peace. They shall break forth into singing. Israel, this is your obligation to make this a reality. And this is done by transcending yourself and returning to your true nature, which is that which is made in the image and the likeness of Elohim through the observance of his word. And then it will be undeniable. Even the cypress trees rejoice over you, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you were cut down, no woodcutter has come up against us. The grave from beneath is excited about you to meet you at your coming. It stirs up the dead for you, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones all the sovereigns of the Gentiles. All of them respond and say to you, have you also become as weak as we? Have you become like us? Your arrogance has been brought down to the grave, and the sound of your stringed instruments. The maggot is spread under you, and worms cover you. How you have fallen from the heavens, O Hillel, son of the morning. This is the root of all of the western and even the eastern empires before them, the Greeces, the Persians, the Babylons, the Assyrians, the Mitzrayims, the Kemet. It was Hillel that inspired them. It was Lucifer, the son of the morning, Ben Shachar, Hillel ben Shachar, he who brings the counterfeit light. You have been cut down to the ground, you who laid low the Gentiles. For you have said in your heart, let me go up to the heavens. Let me raise my throne above the stars of hell, and let me sit in the mount of meeting on the sides of the north. Let me go up above the heights of the clouds. Let me be like the Most High. He wants his own kingdom, and he has established it here on earth for far too long. But Babylon, we're going to tear your kingdom down. But you are brought down to the grave, to the sides of the pit. Those who see you stare at you and ponder over you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook rains, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who would not open the house of his prisoners? All the sovereigns of the Gentiles, all of them were laid in esteem, everyone in his own house. Speaking of these Western nations, these imperialist nations, but you have been thrown from your grave like an abominable branch, like the garment of those who were slain, thrust through with the sword. You go down to the stones of the pit, like a trampled corpse. You are not joined with them in burial, for you have destroyed your land and slain your people. Let the seed of evildoers never be mentioned. Prepare his children for slaughter because of the crookedness of their fathers, lest they rise up and possess the land and fill the space of the world with cities. And I shall rise up against them, declares Yah of hosts, and shall cut off from Babel the name and remnant and offspring and descendant, declares Yah. And I shall make it a possession for the porcupine in marshes and muddy water, and shall sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares Yah of hosts. Yah has sworn, saying, truly, as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so it stands. Selah. And with that, this will conclude the podcast, as we will leave off on the thought that the righteous shall truly rise up in these times, and there is no weapon that shall form against us. Even if we do taste death, we must understand that the revolutionary might be taken out, but the revolution shall never be taken out. So we want to sign off and invite you back for next week, as we will deal with the true revolutionary in the name of one who is called Sister and Mama C lovingly, but we know her as Charlotte Hill O'Neal. She will be here live with us here at our humble abode, and we will discuss, so much with Mama C. So tune in next week, 6 to 8 p.m. here on Hebrew Vision Live at Spreaker.com, and we will truly continue to bring forth the voice of the people. I want to thank each and every one of you all for tuning in to this broadcast, and we look forward to continuing this particular broadcast of Hebrew Vision Live next week. And as we started, we're going to also end it with the same track, the Hebrew Vision song and theme, Let My People Go.